Thank you, Bill. You know, I have a challenge here. With one hand, I must hold this microphone. With my other two hands, I have a text to deal with. And with my fourth hand, I'm going to change the slides. Does anyone have anything to suggest here? Yes. All right. Can I have some more hands up here? Do you have a lapel microphone? I can't hold the microphone. Okay. Surely Hong Kong can come up with a technical solution here to this. Yes.
That'll come later on, so just give fair warning.
Thank you. Am I coming through loud and clear now? Thank you. Well, it's my pleasure to acknowledge the invitation of my fellow Kansan, Jim Gwartney, to participate in this distinctive celebration of his ongoing path-breaking economic freedom project. You'll notice that Jim Gwartney is one of the authors on the booklet that you have received. I wish also to thank Fred McMahon of the Fraser Institute, and particularly Peter Wong of Lion Rock, for hosting the arrangements for my wife Candace and I to make this trip. And my wife Candace, would you please stand up over there? She goes everywhere with me, and in fact, if she doesn't go, I don't go. Lovers of freedom, like the many members of the Economic Freedom of the World Network, have just cause to believe that liberty forms the mainsprings of the worldwide growth in human economic betterment. This is because freedom nurtures innovation, the key component in all economic activity. The evidence makes it plain that the greater a country's liberty, the greater is its per capita creation of wealth, and the smaller is the gap between rich and poor. Even more important, and not easily measured, is the fact that freedom expands people's opportunities. And this is central to human welfare. But these ideas are not widely shared nor understood because people do not have to consciously understand the socio-economic principles at work in their society in order to be effective agents whose can-do knowledge is silently coordinated with that of others to advance human betterment. Hayek has articulated these principles and most effectively restated for our time the genius of David Hume and Adam Smith. Although ignorance of these principles does not prevent people from responding creatively to their guidance, that ignorance becomes damaging when it is aligned with public policies that mistakenly target particular immediate outcomes rather than the rules that facilitate long-term wealth creation. The problem with targeting particular outcomes is that the opportunity cost, what's given up, and reduced wealth creation are unknown. And when those costs float to the surface, it is often too late to return to the status quo and fix it, because the status quo has been redefined by a brush fire that turned into a forest fire. We have had two such conflagrations in 80 years, the Great Depression and the ongoing current Great Recession. Both were great setbacks for freedom. Not, I think, long-term setbacks, but the first led to a heightening of class warfare marked by the heaping of demonic blame on business and on the abstract rich. Regretfully, that means of defining the current crisis has returned, with our troubles also blamed on deregulation. Policy discussions have been riddled with finding blame rather than finding prior to 1758, Adam Smith had written a draft of his History of Astronomy, in which he stated that, and I quote, "Newton's followers have from his principles ventured even to predict the returns of several comets, particularly the one which is to make its appearance in 1758. Subsequently, he added a footnote, quote, the return of the comet happened agreeably to the prediction," unquote. Smith is referring to Halley's Comet, which has returned on schedule about every 76 years since 1758. It is difficult for us today to even imagine what a mind-transforming event was this prediction and its miraculous verification. The significance of Newtonian science was captured at the time by Alexander Pope, and I quote, "Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, "Let Newton be," and all was light. But the important consequence for us today, here in this very room, was that the inspired Scottish geniuses asked the key question: what other laws lay hid in night? And they launched the search for new thought models that could improve our understanding of the social, economic, legal, and political framework whose order, like Newton's, also surrounded them. An order that Adam Ferguson famously described as, quote, "the result of human action, but not the execution of human design." Although Smith revolutionized the way we see the world and created modern economics, he would have been disheartened by the utterly vulgar distortions of his enduring message. Smith opposed slavery 70 years before it was outlawed by the British Parliament. He opposed mercantilism, colonialism, and empire when such opposition was unpopular. He championed the principle that a common street porter was not in his nature intellectually inferior to a philosopher, and developed the insight that the rich, with all their preoccupation with what he called the trivia of baubles and trinkets, were the custodians of wealth who preserved the seed corn against private and public forms of current consumption, thereby assuring those capital improvements that would create a better future even for the poorest. These principles would nourish 200 years of growth, and as we now understand, Smith's capital improvements were not to be found primarily in producer goods, tools, and machinery, but innovation, what McCloskey calls the tools of the mind. Smith's views are agreeable, of course, to the incredible economic accomplishments of Hong Kong. Unlike our many pretentious economic experts today, authority alone never sufficed to command Smith's respect. Smith's first letter, written as an entering student at Oxford in 1740, noted with sardonic humor that, quote, "It will be his own fault if anyone should endanger his health at Oxford by excessive study, our only business here being to do prayers twice a day and lecture twice a week," unquote. The current debate is laden with the language of regulation and the demonization of bipartisan deregulation movement associated with the Carter and Reagan administrations. This is a distortion and a mistake. And we here at this meeting should be clear that it is really about property rights, because there is no such thing as a market unrestricted by rules defining what constitutes foul play. Even Mandeville, who Smith thought was wrong-headed, understood that, and I quote, "Greed is beneficial found when it's by justice lopped and bound." It was the genius of David Hume who gave us the right language when in 1739 he published his first book, A Treatise of Human Nature, wherein he states the property right foundations of social order. His voice echoes the spirit of Newton. We have now run over the three fundamental laws of nature: that of the stability of possession, of its transference by consent and of the performance of promises. 'Tis on the strict observance of these three laws that the peace and security of human society entirely depend. Nor is there any possibility of establishing a good correspondence among men where these are neglected. Society is absolutely necessary for the well-being of men, and these laws are as necessary to the support of society. Whatever restraint they may impose on the passions of men, they are the real offspring of those passions and are only a more artful and more refined way of satisfying them. I suggest you spend a couple of hours thinking about that great statement by David Hume, because that's what Hong Kong is all about. It's what freedom is all about. But why do we restrain ourselves in the matter of property? It's not because of reason, for we also learn from Hume the important maxim, and I quote, that the rules of morality are not the conclusions of our reason. The answer would come from Adam Smith in 1759 when he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments. The Theory of Moral Sentiments is basically his first and last book. It was originally published in 1759, and then after several minor modifications, he completely revised it shortly before his death, and it was published in 1790. The central idea is that we learn to discipline and restrain our actions out of our experience of human sociality. We endeavor to examine our own conduct as we imagine any other fair and impartial spectator would examine it. Now, the fair and impartial spectator was a metaphor for the judgments we apply to others as we endeavor to exchange, mirror-like, our perspective with that of others. And in the words of Bobby Burns, whose statue is in Edinburgh, is just down High Street from Adam Smith's, so what is Smith's first punchline? It is that, and I quote, if he would act so as that the impartial spectator may enter into the principles of his conduct, he must upon all occasions humble the arrogance of his self-love and bring it down to something which other men can go along with. Since Smith uses the phrase go along with about every 8 pages, and by this repetition brings home to us the manner in which we govern each other's actions by defining our own boundaries and by discovering and interacting within the social bounds of propriety. It is out of our sense of propriety, what is proper, that we fashion the rights of property, the individual rights to take action in civil society, otherwise known as the rule of law, by which we limit destructive transgressions and enable freedom to do the world's work. Smith's key concept here I call his injustice proposition. Quote, actions of a hurtful tendency which proceed from improper motives seem alone to deserve punishment, because such alone are the approved objects of resentment or excite sympathetic resentment. And further, resentment seems to have been given us by nature for defense, and for defense only. It is the safeguard of justice and the security of innocence. Smith explicitly argued that property rights under modern civil government originate from human resentment of the violation of justice. Quote, he says, among equals and antecedent to the institution of civil government, each individual is regarded as having a right both to defend himself from injuries and to exact punishment for those which have been done to him. And as the greater and more irreparable the evil that is done, the resentment of the sufferer runs naturally the higher. The most sacred laws of justice, therefore, those whose violation seems to call loudest for vengeance and punishment, are the laws which guard the life and person of our neighbor. The next are those which guard his property and possessions. And last of all come those which guard what is due to him from the promises of others. For Smith, what safeguards justice and the security of rules do not reward acts of justice. We punish acts of injustice. Justice is what is left over after suitable sanctions are put on injustice. You do not get a reward for driving through a green light. Innocence is your duty. Rather, you get a citation for driving through a red light. Freedom is maximized by focusing only on the boundaries that constrain it in the interest of other people's freedom. That boundary is not fixed, but requires re-examination in the light of changing experience and technology. Moreover, Smith's argument in Sentiments is that civil law quite naturally encodes the emergent social rules found to be effective in preventing those actions that are intolerable, what people cannot go along with. Rules do not determine what is right. Rather, rules emerge out of what people discover to be right.